The time is now 1 o'clock Eastern, the official start time for today's broadcast. Today's topic is exploring batch claims. I am honored to have with me today Dan Sullivan, Tom Syzek, and Susan Blasik-Miller. We are going to be talking about batch claims. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Dr. Dan Sullivan. Doctor, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Jen, and hi, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation on batch claims and batch events. Again, I'm Dan Sullivan. I'm the President, CEO, and founder of the Sullivan Group, and I'm very happy to be joined by Dr. Tom Syzek, VP of E-Learning Solutions with the Sullivan Group, and Susan Blasik-Miller, defense attorney with Frohn, Fries, and Arnold. Susan, I hope I said that first name
Friend,
correctly.
but that's okay.
Friend, Fries, and Arnold. Thank you for that. So again, thank you very much for joining us today. And today's subject area is batch claims and batch events. And here's the agenda for the presentation. But I wanted to start by saying that I'm an emergency physician. I have a passion for identifying the causes of medical errors and creating system solutions to reduce the number of medical errors, the patient adverse outcomes, improving patient safety. And we've been doing that for almost 20 years now. Across the spectrum of medicine. And frankly, 2 years ago, I didn't know what a batch claim was. And I was at a meeting with some insurance professionals, and they brought up the issue of batch claims. And I said, well, explain that to me. And so for almost 20 years, we've been trying to figure out solutions to reduce medical errors and improve patient safety. And when I learned about batch claims and we researched batch claims, I thought there is a huge opportunity to avoid or mitigate batch events. And it's simply that medical professionals don't know what they are and have never studied them. And I thought this was a great opportunity for us to jump into this arena and do some education and perhaps avoid the total calamity and catastrophe that batch events are. And so on this call, if you're an insurance professional, you probably know about batch claims. If you're a legal professional, you probably know about batch claims. If you are a medical professional, this may be new to you, and this is an opportunity to dramatically improve patient safety. And so there's likely to be a mix of folks, and I think there's something very important for everyone on this call. So our agenda for today is define the batch claim or batch event, review typical consequences of batch events, present a profile or overview from our internal research of batch claims. And with Susan on board here today, she may offer us some additional areas that we should be concerned about and that we'll build into our online education. Discuss why a presentation on this subject is necessary, because I think there's much work to be done here. We'll review several cases to kind of elaborate on the profile, make recommendations on minimizing loss and defense strategies. And then the fun part, we'll challenge the listeners to participate, broaden the discussion, and share batch-related experiences. Because there's much to be known, much to be shared, and much that we can do in this critically important area. So let's start by defining the batch claim or event. And it'll need some cases to sort of flesh it out if you're not familiar with the subject area. A systemic loss caused by a series of errors, omissions, business practices, accidents, occurrences, medical incidents, or negligent acts arising out of an originating cause. I just had to add, in other words, a group of events that are connected in one way or another, usually with an individual or bad actor in a hospital or hospital organization. But that will become completely clear to you in just a moment. And why the presentation? Because the consequences are incredible in the hospital organization, to the patients that are involved, to the community that the hospital sits in. These usually involve patient injury, often death, before the conduct or problem is recognized. Many patient lives can be affected. In retrospect, there are recognizable patterns of events, things, trends, patterns that we could see and maybe do something about. Often colleagues, supervisors, or leadership had some level of awareness of the problem. And again, the presentation is about education and opportunities to prevent or minimize these events. That's the Sullivan Group mission. I won't go in depth in the Angel of Death case, which was so well publicized in recent years, but this really, along with the definition, brings home the message. What is a batch event? Charles Cullen, perhaps the most prolific serial killer in American history, an intensive care unit nurse who murdered patients with toxic intravenous injections, possibly up to 400 people. He was the subject of dozens of complaints and disciplinary citations, police investigations, 20 suicide attempts, several psych lockdowns. Many supervisors and colleagues were aware in his places of employment, and hospitals continued to send him with glowing references to be someone else's problem. That's a batch event. So that said, when I learned about batch events, we began researching internally to help get a sort of a 20,000-foot view of what these looked like. And after a couple of years of looking into this, I'm absolutely not saying this is a complete list. I'd like a complete list. I would actually like your help in making this a complete list. We'll get back online. We'll edit our education so that we can make our online badge course more thorough and more complete. But I did a lot of research, and this is what I found. Inappropriate or needless procedures, maybe new procedures, or procedures not approved by the FDA is a huge, maybe the most frequent event I found in my analysis was the inappropriate or needless procedures, inadequate credentialing cases, problems related to sterilizing equipment, sexual and physical abuse cases, infectious exposure cases, medical products cases, and equipment maintenance cases. Now, we will not be able to present multiple cases in all of these areas, and I'm sure that you're familiar, certainly if you're an insurance or legal professional, with just some incredible cases in the badge event area. But we'll try and use cases to provide an overview of this profile and drill down a little bit into as many areas as we can. importantly, why a presentation on batch events? I feel that we need to establish an awareness of the problem among medical practitioners and hospital leadership. And in doing that, create a culture of vigilance and communication related to unusual or inappropriate events or occurrences. Something I read in the newspaper this morning sort of sparked a connection to this presentation. You know, pull out your earbuds and get your face out of the cell phone and look around. Be vigilant. Identify things that are happening that don't seem quite right, and report them, communicate them. Create a systems approach to preventing or minimizing the severity of these events. And when an event does occur, and they're inevitable, learn how to best manage it from a patient safety, logistics, community, and legal perspective. So we're into the profile now, and here is a case on inappropriate procedures, at the first bullet point in the profile list. And when I jumped into the research on batch events and began to fill out a database on batch events, the most frequent that I found was inappropriate implantation of cardiac stents and some other cardiac procedures as well. Just struck by how often they showed up on lists of batch-type cases in litigation. This is an example. Dr. Mark Madai implanted cardiac stents in as many as 585 patients who didn't need them at St. Joseph Hospital in Towson, Maryland. This occurred over a 2-year period. Medicare paid $3.8 million for the treatments that they later considered inappropriate. He became a favorite son of the Abbott Laboratories, who helped to fund a big pig roast celebration at Dr. Madai's house with hospital techs and employees are all invited following his insertion of 30 stents in one day. St. Joseph's paid a $22 million settlement for illegal kickbacks. In the civil proceedings, St. Joseph's agreed to up to $37 million to settle with patients, and it was very clear, and this is really a key message here, evidence-based clinical guidelines were not followed in identifying patients for stent placement. It's very consistent throughout the stent-type cases, is that there was not a uniform evidence-based protocol that people were obligated to follow. Too much variability. Dr. Madai lied to patients about the level of blockage. Generally speaking, a certain level of blockage is necessary to plan a stent placement, 60 to 70% or above. And Dr. Madai would tell patients that there's 90% blockage when, in fact, there was only 10. Reports suggest that leadership was probably aware, and that, of course, is another absolutely huge issue. That these procedures were happening, maybe a financial leader for the hospital, and leadership was probably aware at this hospital. I'm going to turn it over to Tom and Susan for discussion of the event and get their thoughts on this, but I wanted to just address that first bullet point on this discussion slide, which is that I found in my research a lot of stent cases. I also found quite a number of alleged inappropriate bypass surgery and inappropriate pacemaker placement. So cardiology is really way up there if you're going to be addressing a system solution cardiology may be your first stop. So Tom and Susan, let me turn it over to you for discussion.
Thanks, Dan, and again, welcome everybody. I see quite a few friends amongst the attendees. Well, this may be easy in retrospect to critique or present solutions for this case. It had red flags all over it. I think once you've been crowned as the favorite son of a medical device company or drug company, that's probably not that's probably a huge red flag right there. But this fits the profile of inappropriate or needless procedures. And now that we kind of know what happened, we can go back and help to present or suggest system solutions. And I think Dan hit upon or led up to some of the key ones is kind of peer review. I mean, if you're seeing that something's going on in your cardiac lab and it's an increased unusual frequency of something or unusual outcomes, there are mechanisms in place to use departmental and hospital-wide peer review. However, I think that one of the barriers is often a culture of silence when you have a star producer helping patients supposedly, and also producing well for the hospital with lots of admissions. The culture of silence can be kind of in place and somewhat intimidating, and opening up to a culture of communication, I think, is one of the key points or threads we'll find throughout all of the batch events. So a closer oversight of the hospital cardiac program with diligence in showing that they are, or that this physician in particular, or any physician, is following the guidelines, reviewing the cases, peer reviewing the cases, using the best medical evidence and national benchmarks. Again, watching for physician outliers if you're seeing brand new procedures that have never been done, or huge numbers of procedures, 30 stints in one day. These are red flags. It doesn't automatically mean that these are negligent or inappropriate, but I think we should break into the culture of communication to question this. And education, I think, of the medical staff as well as the personnel in the cath lab and other areas that procedures are performed would be a very reasonable system solution to start with. So happy to hand it back to you, Dan, unless Susan has any comments.
Well, the only thing, hi, this is Susan. The only thing I wanted to mention about batch events that arise in a hospital is the fact that not every physician in the hospital who hears something about perhaps somebody doing something improper has a legal obligation to do something about that. However, if a physician is involved in a patient's care, in other words, let's say they're the anesthesia provider and they're one of the people who are involved in that patient's care where there's a question about whether this physician's doing too many procedures, they're needless, or maybe the person's a consulting physician. Once they have a duty to that patient because of some patient care and they know that there's a question, then they not only have an ethical moral obligation to say something, but they then have a legal obligation as well. Likewise, if they're involved in one of the committees at the hospital, that gives them more of an obligation than just the average physician walking through a hospital. So I think hospital physicians need to be aware that being in a hospital and hearing these things, getting involved in patient care, being on hospital committees, exposes them to legal liability in addition, as I said, to the ethical and moral obligations they may have.
Thanks, Susan. Right. We had this discussion as we were preparing for today's presentation. All the more reason for getting this kind of a presentation or for getting this video or for getting medical practitioners online to understand this situation, because I'll bet the issue you brought up, Susan, is not apparent to most practicing physicians.
No, it's not, and then the problem is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No,
the problem
please.
is when they realize it, it's too late. By then, there's all these claims, and Tom knows of the Dr. Burt situation in Ohio. Anybody who had seen in the 70s and the 80s the love surgeon, that led to a hospital closing because of those claims. So, you know, it's too late by then. All the claims come out, and then the doctors and the hospital end up going down financially.
I'll finish up on this discussion by saying that if you were to make me the chief medical officer of your hospital, and please don't, but if you do, I'm going to get a look at the cardiac program. If you're a hospital and you have a cardiac program, you should be looking at it. And if there is a discomfort internally because you're using your own internal folks to look, and you don't think peer review will show you that variability and the outliers, bring somebody in from the outside. Bring in a respected person from the outside. But this is a high-risk area. It's the highest frequency area that I could find in my research. And so let me turn this over to Tom.
Thanks, Dan. So we talked about unnecessary or inappropriate procedures, and in this next case involving a spine surgeon, we will use the term alleged because many of these cases are still open and ongoing in the Ohio area. So we will only be discussing what is known publicly because of ongoing litigation. But in this instance, Dr. Durrani is alleged to perform inappropriate and negligent spine and neck surgery using a medical product, which is called Infuse, to help regrow damaged bone. He was prolific in his practice, nothing wrong with that, but this involved hundreds of patients at several institutions. So in fact, there are at least 3 or 4 class action suits resulting from this, over 500 cases that are all involving medical negligence. There are federal indictments and allegations, and so it is quite a big deal in the Southwest Ohio area, and a few of these cases have actually gone to trial, and many more to go, I would think. So the allegations are that Dr. Durrani, again, somewhat lied, making false diagnoses in order to use the product of Infuse, and ended up performing unnecessary surgeries, scaring patients to say, gosh, this could be tremendously worse, we've got to get to do this surgery, lying, these are allegations, again, lying to colleagues to be able to be so prolific and get this kind of patient mill running. Also lying to patients about his physician license being revoked. So as I mentioned earlier, there's many, many complaints, both civil, criminal cases, and while these were ongoing, Dr. Durrani, despite the fact of having his passport revoked, fled the country. So he's out of the country now, and you can imagine what this means for insurers and plaintiffs and the defense side of this whole mess. Not hopeless, but certainly unbelievable theater that is played out in the newspapers with tremendous negative publicity for some of the top medical centers in the area. So, I'll turn it over to Dan and Susan for commentary.
Yeah, in this case, there's a lot published on this case, and as you read that, and by the way, so many of these cases are settled that it's hard to get a good legal transcript of people talking under oath. And much of what you see is articles published in newspapers and in tabloids. So a little bit difficult to research, but a lot has been published on this case. And And as I went through what is available, it just seemed to me that it defies reason that folks, colleagues, other staff did not know what was happening in this case. That hospital leadership had simply no awareness of what was going on in Dr. Durrani's OR, and more specifically, that his orthopedic colleagues wouldn't have some concerns about these cases. This culture of silence, I think, probably had an impact here. The number of cases that Tom just mentioned, it justifies reason. And what is this presentation about? It's about stopping this. It's about patient safety. We'll hear from Susan a little bit about what you're going to do when these cases do occur. But if we can stop or we can mitigate, that's what this is about, system solution. There's a new procedure, careful systematic review of new procedures. This happened to be with a product called Infuse. But every new procedure, did that happen at this facility, at those facilities? Does it happen at your facilities? A routine review of a new product. It was not only a new procedure, it was a new product. And there's some interesting research on this product. It's not okayed for pediatrics, and he used it in pediatric cases. Should have been a huge red flag. And there's a lot of research now that raises concerns about its use at all. Routine review of new products, create that culture of communication. I think somebody knew, and it's easy to say that, create a culture of communication, but what does that mean? It means easy access, and it means that someone is listening. So if it's not easy to get into the system to report on it, or you don't get some feedback from it, that system will fail. That needs to be in place. Susan, any additional thoughts on this case?
The only other thing I would add is when you're talking about new procedures and new products, they can be used in an appropriate situation, but one thing that can help a provider is to make sure that they have good, clear consent forms about the fact that the procedure is new, and so that the patient is aware that this is cutting-edge procedure. I know in one set of batch claims that I defended, they had good consent forms that explained to the patient that this was a relatively new procedure and it wasn't being done anywhere else. And that helped to minimize the settlements in that case. And when we actually had to defend one of the cases, it helped us in defending the case and getting a defense verdict.
Great, thank you. So let's move on. We'll call David DK, because I'm just struggling with that last name. But DK was an IV drug abuser with hepatitis C. And so there's a couple of areas here. Drug diversion is one of those batch event subject areas. Credentialing is yet another. So DK was an IV drug abuser with hepatitis C. His resume included time spent in multiple hospitals across the country where he was often fired for drug use. New Hampshire-based Exeter Hospital hired DK as a technician in the cardiac cath lab, and incredibly, he injected himself with IV pain meds, oftentimes fentanyl. He would take the syringe, he would inject himself. He would then grab a bottle of saline, he would refill that syringe, and he would put it back where he got it. It's an amazing fact pattern. 46 patients in 3 states have been diagnosed with the same hepatitis C that DK has. He was arrested in 2010, sentenced to 39 years in jail. The batch event implications are clearer. But in addition, interestingly, Exeter sued a prior hospital employer who knew of the drug abuse and did not report the drug abuse to any law enforcement or licensing authority. So there is an interesting twist or nuance to these batch event cases, and I thought in the discussion, Susan, you could help us out with that one.
Mm-hmm. Yes, actually, it was interesting because not only did they sue a former hospital, they sued a former placement agency that placed him not at Exeter but at a different hospital, a prior hospital, and then they also sued the American Registry of Radiologists Technologists. And the claims against those entities really related to their duty to report this type of behavior. Now, clearly, lawyers tell employers all the time to be very vague in their references that they give about employees. But when you're talking about healthcare providers, there's a different standard involved, because if you know of conduct of an employee which may cause harm to your patients, you have more of an obligation than does the standard employer who found out that their employee was using drugs and they discharged them. So one of the things is reporting to nursing boards, and in this case to the American Registry for Radiologists Technologists. One of the hospitals did report to the ARRT, but the ARRT apparently didn't take any action. And so the court found that that was actionable in that case. And so the big one is not necessarily giving the references to employers, other employers, but reporting to nursing boards, to their licensing board, and then letting that board take it from there. They can do the investigation. But there is an obligation, if you feel that this could result in detriment to patient care, to make sure that you report that information.
Really great point. Tom, anything on this one?
Oh, yes. The credentialing bullet is interesting and key from my point of view. If you've gone through any kind of financial transaction, say home loan or some type of loan recently, the amount of diligence and background checking that the loan agency will do on you is like a financial colonoscopy. And I think that the parallel here is that as much diligence should at least be given to credentialing of medical providers. I mean, the duty of these providers to their patients and the life and death implications are such that credentialing policies and procedures really need to go to great lengths, I think, to do background checks. And I can't imagine that they wouldn't have found something in this case, despite the fact of doctored references. Go ahead, Susan.
Go, Susan.
I was going to say the difference here is if this was a physician, I would have thought that they would have found more information. But this person was a tech, and the tech was placed in the various hospitals by placement agencies. So there was one placement agency that sent him to 2 earlier hospitals, and then there was a break in time of his employment. Then a different temporary agency placed him at this Exeter hospital and another hospital prior to that. And so the hospital's relying on these temp agencies or these staffing agencies to do the background checks, and in some cases, they're not doing what they're claiming they should do. So that's where the problem comes in.
Interesting. And
yeah, I had one of those cases where they relied on it, a temp agency, and they ended up hiring a serial rapist in a hospital, and he ended up raping one of the staff members.
In this case, where it involves a drug diversion, it's sad to say that these cases still occur. Addiction and drug diversion are still big problems. But one system solution I think that has likely spread through the country is the computerization of drug order entry and dispensing in the form of Pyxis. And I think that has probably helped cut down on it a lot, although I still think that this can occur. So not all of these can be prevented, but then the event needs to be managed when it does occur.
Tom, your reference to the financial colonoscopy still has me tingling a bit, but why don't we move on?
Okay. Well, I'll keep it clean from here on out. So in the next case, it is more in the profile of either medical products or equipment maintenance and big problems sterilizing equipment. So in this case, of hydraulic fluid used as sterilizing agent. employees of the automatic elevator company. They serviced the elevators at Duke and drained hydraulic fluid from the elevators and put it in plastic buckets provided by Duke. These buckets, unfortunately, came from a sterilization products vendor and had the outside labels as containing sterilization products. So you can see you have a kind of a definitely non-medical fluid put into containers that had medical labeling. So, you know, here's a no-no that'll lead to some solutions. But the workers at Duke spotted these in storage. Now that they see, gosh, we don't know what's in them. It looks like they're labeled as sterilization products. They called the sterilization fluid vendor to pick them up, and they did. This is like Swiss cheese. I mean, how many holes in Swiss cheese have to line up for this to happen? But anyway, the sterilization company picks them up, sold the buckets, still marked as sterile products, and sold them back to Duke. So Duke gets them back. This hydraulic fluid was used in various ways to wash instruments. Now in hydraulic fluid, certainly made them slippery, but not sterile. And there were claims from dozens of patients who said they suffered from a range of health problems. I'll turn it over to, here, I'll continue on. Duke did settle with more than a few patients for a huge amount of money. This is a classic batch claim. Federal investigation ensued, and in that investigation, they uncovered comments that some of the staff noticed something fishy or oily or greasy, actually, where the instruments were slippery and difficult to hold on to. But, you know, with a high level of trust, you may think, gosh, that's just new sterilization, unless they start dropping out of your hands during surgery. And the allegations included the negligence in allowing the sterilization detergent barrels to be sticking around and be used as waste containers, in using unsealed barrels as detergent, or in accepting those unsealed barrels, and that's a sealing problem where the proper checks and balances weren't followed. And the last allegation was delay in recognizing problems with staff the staff complaints didn't really do anything about the staff complaints with slick and greasy instruments. So I'll turn it over to Dan. And Susan.
Yeah, and as I look at those allegations, I think, 2 and 3 certainly have some merit, or at least present some opportunities for solution. This is very different. It's obviously a really unusual fact pattern. But regardless, I think that the system solutions, the appropriate approach with no variability maybe completely avoids this case. The staff accepted unsealed barrels, period. Never. That's a never event. It should never happen. Solution. Education. Did these individuals know that was the case? They should. They all should. Every single one should. Opportunity to completely avoid, not to mitigate, but to completely avoid. And there were complaints in the information surrounding the case. There were complaints of greasy, sticky equipment. So where did that communication go? Did it go to the place where these kinds of communications are supposed to go? And did those communications get acted upon very quickly with feedback that same day? Thank you, got it, looking into it. Or did it just sit on someone's desk or on someone's computer for a while? This is one of those cases where maybe in others, you're not going to stop those first few injections of fentanyl and transmission of hepatitis C. But here, I think this could have been avoided completely. Susan, did you have anything on this one?
No, nothing from me.
Okay. All right. Then let's keep moving. Just a quick medical products case. A 2-hospital system ordered a particular morphine cassette. They'd been using it for years. One order of cassette arrives mislabeled. decimal point problem, it contained 10 times the labeled dose of morphine. Before the error was discovered, 10 mothers received the 10-time recommended dose. And Tom, a quick discussion on this one?
Yeah, I agree with the first bullet here. This is Tom. It can be impossible in some cases. You know, the practitioners, I'm sure, thought they were doing the right thing with checks and balances, but if the cases are mislabeled, that really makes it tough. You'd have to look at the outcome, meaning a 10 times dose. Well, what's happening to the patient, and really think about, gosh, are they getting excessively sedated? Are there respiratory problems? And just keep an open mind that things are not as they should be. So this is more a clinical awareness, clinician awareness type of thing. You know, I know a similar case in which a physician said, gosh, every time the patient took his benign medication, their blood sugar dropped. And he finally found out that, again, the pill bottles were mislabeled and they were diabetic drugs. So this takes a sharp clinician knowing what to expect from the outcome of medications used, questioning things, bringing it up with leaders and peers if possible, and reporting some potentially adverse events where it's easy to report, timely-wise, and to your superiors, and that someone will be listening.
Yeah, I agree, Tom. You know, if you're going to give 1 milligram of morphine, but you gave 10, you know, a little vigilance. Some vigilance and some reporting. You think you're going to give 10, you just gave 100. You give 100, and you've got a patient who doesn't look right. So maybe something earlier could have happened here. It wasn't a huge number of people that were involved in this case, but you know, I agree with you. It's, you know, it's pulling out the earbuds, it's getting your face out of the cell phone, and being vigilant. So something was wrong in a particular case. Susan, anything on this one?
No.
Okay. Tom, your equipment maintenance case.
Sure. Being the home maintenance janitorial type, I'll take care of this one now. So St. Raphael Hospital in New Haven, Connecticut, they converted a room that was used for surgery or some other procedures and switched it over to a cardiac cath lab. And so the pre-existing nitrous oxide supply line, you know, these come from down in the basement somewhere that are hooked up to tanks, and the lines go into the room. Well, they did not disconnect the nitrous oxide supply. And again, this is a Swiss cheese, how many things can go wrong lined up. But in cardiac cath, nitrous oxide, which is a gas used for anesthesia, is not used in cardiac cath procedures, at least in times I've been there. I've not seen that. And there are safeguards. There's a pin index safety system. So if you plug in the flow meter for oxygen, the pins only fit at 12 and 6 o'clock. And so if you're trying to use some other type of gas, in this case nitrous, it shouldn't fit because the pins won't line up. Nitrous pins are different. A great safeguard that unfortunately in this case didn't work because, lo and behold, there was a broken pin at the 6 o'clock position on the oxygen, so the nitrous fit. The oxygen fit into the nitrous socket. So they're color-coded as well, because another safeguard. You know, anesthesia has tons of safeguards, and by and large does very well as a specialty in this area. So there's color coding, but the gas color codes were blocked by other equipment, so it really couldn't be seen. And again, opportunity for improvement here for sure. So the patient, number one, hooked up to nitrous, should have been hooked up to oxygen for cardiac cath, or cardiac procedure, I should say. When the respiratory distress developed, the anesthesiologist did what they certainly thought they should do, and turned up the oxygen, which was nitrous, thereby further anesthetizing the patient, and the patient died. So once this was detected, they were able to trace it back to a previous death related to this equipment maintenance problem.
Yeah, another interesting case, and just representative of a profile of those kinds of cases. And Maybe this feels like it's sort of a one-off system solution, but I really think we can generalize here. If there's a new procedure, evaluate. If there's a new product, investigate. If there's a room function change, evaluate. Oh, nitrous isn't being used in cardiac cath. Get it out of there. Check maybe the checklist approach to a change in room function is our system solution. Establish a protocol for damaged or problem equipment. The safety system should be checked. The safety system should be checked with each case. Oh, there's no pin. There's supposed to be 2 pins here, and there aren't. Should not have been used. The color-coded safety system should always be in direct line of sight. Again, another checklist sort of approach. Get into the cath lab once a week, take a look around, make sure all the safety systems are working properly, and consider a search. Like I said, consider a surgical cath suite preparation checklist. I want to move through that a little bit quickly as we get close to the end of the hour. I want Susan to have an opportunity to share with you some thoughts on minimizing loss and defense strategies, and then we'll finish up and open up for comments and questions.
Okay, well, when we look at those fact patterns, it seems like these things could never happen, but they do happen, and I've been practicing for more than 30 years, and I've had more than a handful of batch claims. So what we do in those cases is we investigate. So as soon as you determine that there are some potential claims, you want to investigate and see how many potential claims are there, what kind of potential injuries are out there. Once lawsuits get filed, and sometimes hospitals, they disclose this information to the patients. So, for example, my partner is defending batch claims arising out of cardiac stents, and that's in Northeast Ohio. The hospital is the one who sent letters to the patient. As a result of utilization review, they determined this was being done improperly. They sent notices to the patients, and that resulted in claims. So then there were numerous claims and lawsuits. So we do early damages discovery to try to find out, what is the nature of the injuries here? How many of these have serious permanent injury, perhaps death? Some of them are minor. And mind you, there are some people out there who have no significant injury, but because they hear about this, then they think, well, they want to join the bandwagon too. And so what we then do is we group the plaintiffs by the type and the severity of the damage. And then we try to do mass settlement through mediation if possible. In one situation, we had a mediation of about 23 cases, and we ended up with a lump sum that was going to be paid, and then the mediator actually determined 3 groups of plaintiffs by types of injuries and grouped the different plaintiffs into those groups, and that's how they determined how much money they would get. Now, each of the plaintiffs had to agree to go through that process, and they did, and that's how we were able to solve it. Now, we can't resolve or settle all these cases because if any of you are involved in litigation, you know that there are times when either the plaintiff or the plaintiff's counsel is just not going to be reasonable under any circumstances. So when that's the case, then you end up trying the cases where you have unreasonable people. And actually, in the Durrani case, which Tom's talked about, and then I had spine surgery batch cases, we ended up trying one of ours, and we ended up getting a defense verdict, even though the doctor wasn't there to defend himself. He lost his license. He went bankrupt. He never appeared at trial, and we ended up winning that case. And I know the Durrani cases, they've had some defense verdicts. The cases my partner's defending up in Northeast Ohio relating to stents, they've had 2 defense verdicts already. So when the people are unreasonable, we can try them. Now, part of trying those cases is making sure that the court separates the cases and does not allow them to be tried as one, because then the jury knows about all the cases that are out there. Generally, if we try them separately, we have been successful in keeping out evidence of the other cases. And they're just then looking at that one individual case with that one individual plaintiff and rendering a verdict in that case. And then I just wanted to make a reference about the statute of limitations in some of these cases. Because every state has statute of limitations on medical malpractice or wrongful death claims, and when these things come out, sometimes they've been going on, these practices have been going on for 5 years, 6 years, sometimes longer. So a lot of the older cases are sometimes already barred by virtue of the statute of limitations. They may try to get around that by claiming there was fraud. There may be some exceptions, but we end up doing a motion practice and limiting those. So there's various legal defenses that we employ in those cases. But really the main strategy is to try to figure out what you have, what you can resolve as efficiently and reasonably as possible, and then fight the rest of them.
Great. Thanks, Susan. So please, you could join us today. I think that the perspective you brought to the cases and to the minimizing loss and defense strategy is really important part of this presentation. So let's get to summary and conclusions. I had at the beginning challenged the group to help us to, if you are aware of an interesting case, if you are aware of an additional element to the profile, please join in when we get to the Q&A. But quickly, let me move through summary and conclusion so we can get to some of those comments. And that is batch claims and events, they're not well reported or understood in the medical community. Guarantee you, Tom and I are part of it, and it just simply is not part of our education. It's not part of our awareness. All healthcare providers should have a basic awareness of batch-related issues. It's not just physicians, but it's the entire team, everybody who's working in that hospital community. There are opportunities to prevent or mitigate the occurrence or the severity of batch-type events. And we believe, and that's our mission, and increased awareness about batch events should result in increased vigilance in the medical community and a systems approach to avoid them and safer patients. So with that, Tom, if you have a brief closing comment, or Susan, if you have a closing comment, please jump in now, and then we'll open it up to the attendees.
Sure, Dan. Just real quickly, I think in looking through this and in other batch presentations I've attended, there's no cookie-cutter solution that will fit every institution, every batch claim, and prevent every claim. And that we don't profess to have all the answers or solutions. So we have made some suggestions on system solutions, and certainly challenge everyone in the of the participants to come up with new ideas and share them with us so that the entire community of patient safety can benefit from your great solutions. Thanks, Dan.
Susan?
Yes, from my standpoint, by the time they get to me, the damage has already been done, and I can see in many batch claims that if there had been a better system of vigilance, communicating, and taking action, that many of these wouldn't have come to where they were in terms of the damage, or at least the damage would have been minimized. So I agree with you totally when you talk about the fact that you want to encourage a climate of communication and vigilance.
Great, thank you. And Jen, with that, we will close and turn it back over to you for your leadership through our Q&A session. And looking at some of I can see the question board there, and I see that there are several. So let me get it back to you so we can jump into them.
Terrific. That was such an amazing presentation. Thank you all so much for that. And as you might imagine, we have quite a queue of questions right now. So I'm hopeful we can get through all of them. If we don't, certainly we can follow up. You can email us at any time, and we can follow up to answer any questions that are left lingering as people need to move on to meetings. So with that, our first question came through when we were talking about the stent case, the cardiology case, and the question is, how much utilization review of procedures do you think hospitals do? Great question.
I'll take it. The answer is I don't know, but not enough. I can tell you that as an emergency practitioner and running an emergency medicine organization, that I was involved in a number of hospitals at the highest levels, and I never heard anything about stent review, analysis, variability, outliers. I never heard this. So perhaps there's a growing awareness as these claims wind up in the newspapers, but in my experience, I did not see much. I hope there's more than I'm aware of. Tom, have you seen that sort of thing in the many hospitals that you've been involved with?
Nothing I can add to that one, Dan.
Okay.
So
Jen, back to you.
Yeah, thanks. We have a series of questions here that all pertain to kind of recognizing and reporting some of this bad behavior. And there are a lot of questions that are kind of circling around that same topic, but I'm just going to pull out one right now because I think, again, this is one of the puzzlers. And this question is, how do you handle a situation where the biggest risk, and then in parentheses, a surgeon, is a significant revenue source?
That is the problem. I think that those should try to be handled internally first by getting the person doing an investigation and getting the assistance that the person needs, and then that usually leads to some disciplinary action if there are to be consequences, and then that disciplinary action is something that then is reported to the medical board and the data bank. But I think that is the problem that we've seen in these batch claims is sometimes because they're such a revenue source for the hospital or the surgical center that they turn a blind eye to these and just can't do that.
Right. There's no question that as you do the research and you trend out these cases that leadership was aware in a number of cases. These neuro cases are big revenue generators. Cardiology is a huge revenue generator. But you have to look at benchmarks. You have to evaluate variability. You have to know what best evidence is, and you need to be following that, just period. And there's just no crossing that line.
Yeah, I would add, Dan, that, this is healthcare, and I think that transparency in what you're doing, whether you're an emergency physician as we are, or a surgeon, should be open and welcoming to questioning and not be threatened by that, by not investigation, but questions. Say, gosh, this is new. We've never run across this, etc. This has a very high standard. This is a huge privilege to be in healthcare. And so I think that the culture of silence has got to go, and there's got to be mechanisms in place to review perhaps more things than are being reviewed now.
And Dr. Syzek, I want to stick with you for a second because another question that we had that came in relates to what you just stated. And as you're answering this, and forgive me for doing this, I'm going to roll through some of our closing slides just so those who need to depart for other meetings are able to depart. But I want you to stick with this one. And the question is, what are some effective strategies to incentivize staff to report bad behavior? So.
Well, I think awareness is always key. Just knowing that these kind of things occur, and that number two, a system in place where it's non-punitive, whether they put it on a computerized system of reporting, as many hospitals have, and there are authority gradients that are broken down where they can speak to their own nursing supervisors in person, or they know who they go to. And I think that this has to be, to break down these barriers, the leadership has to let the message be known that we welcome these, we invite this, we are all here for patient safety, this is non-punitive, you're not going to get in trouble for bringing these things up, and I think that's probably the basis of improving this system. Leadership and open communication, allowing a system where anybody can bring up an issue.
And consider anonymity. They can identify themselves or not. And once the reports come in, they're anonymous. There's no punishment for having reported it. There are changes that are being made. Then all of a sudden, the number of reports goes up dramatically. I did a panel discussion with 2 organizations that implemented a system like that, and they are like, my goodness. At the beginning, there were dribs and drabs, and then by a year into the system, there were so many reports, and the hospital was and employees were so proud of what they had put together because they were making meaningful change that saved lives. So this absolutely can work, and I think early on, anonymity, the choice to identify yourself or not.
This is Susan. I just want to add to that, too. I just also think education of how these things occur, giving them concrete examples of these situations where this has happened and what has happened to some of the physicians who have gotten sued as a result and the financial institutions that have gone under because of this. You need to bring it home to them with some concrete examples, because otherwise they'll think, oh, this will never happen to me.
Agreed.
And with that, we've reached our time. So I just want to thank the three of you so much for today's presentation. This was incredibly powerful, and I certainly learned a lot. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your time with us. As mentioned, we'll have a recording of today's presentation posted within the next 24 to 48 hours to the Sullivan Group's YouTube channel so that you can pick it up there. And I'll just turn it back to you, Dr. Sullivan, for any final closing thoughts for us.
Jen, thanks for hosting. I really enjoyed putting this presentation together. It's a fascinating subject area. There's so much room for opportunity here for our patients and for our hospitals and our communities. Tom and Susan, thanks so much for joining me. It was a wonderful collaboration. And to all of you who have attended, help us on our mission. Get the word out. If your nurses in your organization happen to see the cardiac techs and nurses happen to see that these things happen, guess what? They just might report that there's variability going on in your organization that folks need to know about. So thanks again for attending, Tom and Susan. Thank you again, and have a great day and a great holiday season.
That concludes today's broadcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.